There we go. All right. I can see that we're going to continue to have people come in the room, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hi, my name is Jenny Thomas. I lead the marketing and communications here at APAP, the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. And I'm here with my colleague, Claire Caulfield, who is the producer and host of our award-winning podcast, Arts Work Life. Claire, if you want to say hi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Great. And so we'll hear from Claire in a little bit. We're going to walk through today's agenda and talk to you a little bit about APAP, about the Arts Work Life podcast. Hopefully you know a little bit about us already, but just for those who don't know. And then jump into like some details of, dates to know in relative to the podcast, and most importantly, what makes a great story and what does not. And we're going to talk about story ideas and what's new for 2025 and what the process looks like for storytellers if you're selected. And we'll have a discussion. We have a couple of our storytellers from past podcast seasons in the room. So we'll chat with them a little bit, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. So I'll just jump right in to talk to you a little bit about APAP. So APAP is the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. We've been around since 1957, and we are the national service, advocacy, and membership organization for the live performing arts field. So we primarily work in the booking and touring industry. With 1,700 organizational and individual members, we're dedicated to developing and supporting that robust performing arts, presenting, booking, and touring industry, and all the people who work within it. And many of you may know us from our very well-known APAP NYC conference, which happens in New York every January. It's the leading gathering of performing arts professionals from across North America and then beyond around the world. But this 5-day event attracts over 3,000 professionals. Hopefully many of you have had a chance to join us in New York for professional development, networking, showcasing, and the industry's largest expo hall. So just to save the date, the next conference is January 9th through 13th, 2026 in New York City. And registration will be opening in June. So next slide, we'll talk about the podcast. So hopefully you have all had a chance to listen to the podcast. If you want to, I'd like to ask, if you have heard the podcast before, you can just put a little thumbs up in the reaction or heart or whatever. Just be good to see like who all has listened to the podcast or has participated in the podcast, or you're just excited to hear about it. Just give us a thumbs up. If you can't get to the react button, that's fine too. So Arts Work Life is a podcast. It's really a storytelling podcast, and Claire is going to talk a little bit more about sort of the nature of the podcast. But what it does is it's peeling back the curtain on what it's like to work in the performing arts, featuring personal stories from artists and arts workers, really behind the scenes and up close. And this developed, this was a pandemic response. We realized how essential arts workers are and how sometimes we can be a little bit invisible. People don't know what goes on behind the scenes and what it takes to do what we do. And so during the pandemic, we introduced this podcast to tell those stories. And so we produced this podcast at APAP and with generous support, by the way, by the Wallace Foundation. So we thank them very much for their support. We have had 3 seasons so far. That's 18 episodes. And then we had 2 bonus episodes. We actually are working on another bonus episode that came from the content we gathered at the 2025 conference. We've had over 26,000 downloads from all across the world, 6 continents. And we've won 2 awards. We've won a Bronze Anthem Award. That is the nonprofit arm of the Webbies. And we've also won the Trendy Award for Best Podcast. And that was in our first year, actually, of broadcasting or of podcasting. That's an award given by the Association Trends magazine. To date, we've had 63 storytellers from across the US, Canada, and the world. And so some important dates. Hopefully you have these on your calendar already. The call for story ideas is open right now. Grace, my colleague, has just dropped that link into the chat if you don't have the link already. And today we're talking about how to submit a story and what makes a great story, because we want you to submit your stories. You can do that by Thursday, March 20th will be our first batch of review. But if March 20th is just too soon for you, we will also be accepting stories up until April 10th. So the sooner the better you can get things in. But please, in the meantime, also, if you know people who would be great for this podcast, please share this information. The deadline, if they can't make it by March 20th, we still want to hear from you all. We really want a broad array and representation of the field. That means artists, agent managers, producers, presenters, educators, the entire field we'd like to hear from. And I see there are some questions coming through in the chat. So we will get to those near the end, and I'll make sure Grace and I are going to be watching those. So the first episode this is the fourth season that we're producing. The first episode will be released in late May. We expect to be right after Memorial Day, and there we go. And the remaining episodes will roll out this summer. Great, next slide. Awesome. Okay, so now we're getting into the meat of it, which is, what is that great story? And so I'm going to hand it over to our true storytelling expert and the person that you will get to work with should your story be chosen. And that is my amazing colleague, Claire Caulfield. Claire?
Jenny, thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. The way I describe Arts Work Life is it's a true storytelling podcast. Often when people hear podcasts, they think, something like Joe Rogan or Call Her Daddy, where the host interviews the guest, they talk about their entire life, expertise, all that. Arts Work Life is not that format. It's also not something like The Daily or This American Life. It's not a work of journalism. The closest I can compare it to would be like The Moth or StoryCorps. They're these first-person individual stories. So that's why this first bullet point here, we're looking for a very personal first-person narrative. So when you're submitting your story, we're not asking for a biography or your hot take on something in politics. We want to hear about a time in your life, something that you went through and how it changed your perspective on the arts industry, your role in the industry, arts overall and their importance in society. It's really about your personal experience. Of course, we want it to relate to the performing arts in some way. As you listen through the episodes, you'll see some people's story is tangentially related to the arts because they were working in the arts while they were going through this roller coaster in their life. Sometimes their work in the arts really is the crux of the entire of their entire story, but needs to be related to the performing arts in some way. We really want to take listeners, behind the scenes of the performing arts. We always have a lot of submission from artists and performers, musicians, dancers, singers. We love all of you performers who submit, but we also want to hear from the people who make performing arts work, who get those performers onto the stage. So presenters, agents, producers, and managers, we want to know, what does a day in your life look like? What was a moment in you that really changed your view of the world of the arts industry? What was the moment, the story that made you who you are today? We really want to hear that. And then we're always looking for something new. I know when you submit, you say, oh, have they heard of this before? Submit it always submit any story you think would be good, but we are looking to elevate new voices and to get a different perspective that hasn't been on the show before. Especially, we want to hear stories that are relevant to 2025. As Jenny and I are looking over the submissions, we're going to be asking ourselves, how does this story and this theme relate to 2025? We had a lot of stories about the pandemic, right? How that changed the arts. But those stories, unless there's a way that makes it relevant to 2025, just hearing how, your theater closed, you had to overcome that. Just be really thinking about, why is this relevant to 2025? Think of the things that are going on in the world, in this country, and how your story could provide some insight into someone going forward. Next slide. And what we don't want to hear, I kind of touched on this before, we don't want a biography. We don't want, and we get these pitches every year, I'm the CEO of this company and I want to be on your podcast to promote my company, or I have a show going on and I want people to come and attend my show. That's that's not what Arts Work Life is for. And obviously no one wants to get sued, so we don't want to hear the story about how your business partner screwed you over. So just things to think about. So some things that we're looking for, I always tell the storytellers, and when we hear from some of them, they can attest to this. I ask them, if this story was a short film or a one-act play, what would it look like? What would your character, you, go through, and what would the audience see? So again, we're looking for a personal story of, how have you tackled a tough industry issue or an issue that affects your work? What does a day in your life at your job look like? And what does, the way that you work, what does that say about the industry, the trends in the industry? Have you taken a big risk? Did it work or did it not? We don't just want to hear stories of successes. Some of the things that we learn the most about are our failures and how we overcome them. And then, can your story be inspiring some way, thought-provoking? And, I really want you to think, the person listening to this story, like, what are they taking away from it? What are they learning about our industry? And how are we pushing the industry forward to change? And then again, an experience that is especially relevant in 2025. Your story doesn't have to have been something that has happened to you in the past, 3 months, but whether your story happened in 1989 or 2020, really getting that, why does your story matter now? Why should listeners hear from this now? Great. Next slide. And then I want to stress this, your story should not, you don't have to submit a full one-act play, a fully realized story. We're really just looking for those nuggets and because this process is, if your story is submitted, you'll meet with me first and you and I will brainstorm together. How do we get this story to be the best story it can be? How do we outline this out? We're going to plot it out, the rising action, the climax, the twist, the falling action. So when you submit your story, it doesn't have to be fully cooked. That's what I'm here to help you make the best story possible. But you should be thinking about, how is it relevant to 2025 and how is this a personal story and what changed in your life? And then to tell us a little bit more about this process. I believe we have some past storytellers. So Randall, welcome. You are in season 1. Can you tell us a little bit about the process and what you took away from the experience of being on Arts Work Life?
Well, of course, as Ginny already mentioned, season 1 was in the throes of the pandemic or just toward the end of it. So I would say that the stories basically fell into two categories, tragic or transformational. And so for my purpose, it was transformational because I was one of the people that made the decision to take advantage of the pandemic and retire into something else. I found it, Claire spoke a little bit about, the process of how she puts it together, and it was very interesting. One of the comments she made to me and probably to others in the first season was that it was a much different job working with theater people than with other people in podcast situations because they knew how to talk and just kept telling their story. After we met over the internet with Claire and discussed the format of what I had submitted, she gave a few pointers of what to do and said, okay, we'll meet on this day. And we did. And she said, okay, what do you have? And I started talking, and I just kept watching Claire, and she just kept looking. And so I just kept talking, and she kept looking, and I kept talking. And at the end of it, I was like, do you have any questions? And she was like, no, it's all about you. So you need to tell the story just like you did. So that's how it ends up happening. And you just tell your story, and it was good. What I said after the first season was done and we had a little gathering, one of the comments I made was that one of the interesting things about the process was that there are things that you start to talk about with someone new that you may not have talked about with other people, and all of a sudden it becomes fresh to you as well as to the audience that you're talking to, and that's an interesting process to what goes on. But it was easy. You end up talking, and then Claire cuts it down to about one iota of what you talked about. So it was okay, and hopefully everyone thinks that they got the best part. I found it very interesting in the first season. The stories were, it was pandemic, and I said they were tragic or transformational. I really feel like my story was the only one that seemed to have some joy in it. Some future potential excitement. And then in season 2, if you've listened to them all, and I have, you get into the whole epic battle of Gen Z versus millennials and Gen X's, and that was a very interesting season. And again, I thought that season had a lot of angst in it. And then I was very happy with season 3 to listen to the stories and see a lot more joy coming into theater again after 3 years of experiencing not so much joy. So I was very happy for season 3 to see some joy coming back in, and I look forward to what's going on. But the process for me of doing it was really rather smooth, surprising at sometimes, but smooth and easy and rewarding at the end. For me, it made a lot of opportunity for me to promote my next step through the social media and other areas. So it was fun, and having the awards coming out, another opportunity to promote. So those of you that are looking for that kind of thing, this helps you out there as well. But that was it.
Randall, it's so good to hear from you, and thank you for all those amazing observations. Everything you said was so true, and I think so helpful for any future storytellers. Something that you mentioned, we do have a lot of performers on here that just talk and talk and make my job so easy. But if you're a potential storyteller and hearing that makes you nervous, maybe you're a little bit more shy, you're thinking, oh, do I need to write out a whole script? Absolutely, you do not. I was one of the lucky ones. He made my job easy. But a big part of the behind the scenes process is I do ask you questions during the recording. I ask the storytellers questions, and then I just cut myself out of the recording so you don't hear my voice asking those questions. But I will guide you. Some storytellers want some more hand holding, some they're ready to go, and we're set up in the process for both people, both types of people. We will have a smooth recording process. I tell all the storytellers that it's not, a work of journalism. I'm your friend. I'm here to make sure that you sound good. And so if you stumble over your words or say or have to restart a sentence, or something you says just doesn't make sense, I'll pop in and say, can you say that again? Or I didn't really understand that. Or, you know what, let's check that pronunciation. I wouldn't want you to feel embarrassed. And then I edit it, add the music. So really, like, you're in very safe hands during this process.
That's a really great point, Claire. And I was wondering too, actually, well, okay, before we're going to come back to talking to folks, I'm going to see if Beatrice is available. And now I'm going to cough. So somebody want to take this slide, that'll be great.
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about the process. If your story is selected, and now I've caught the cough from Jenny apparently, you will be notified in late April. And then a professional storyteller, me, you and I will jump on a Zoom together, talk about, why did you submit this story? Why was this moment impactful for you? We'll find the best way to tell your story, and then I'll get you all set up with how to record a professional podcast. You don't need any previous audio experience. You don't need any fancy equipment. I have used this process with people of all levels of tech. It's always gone smoothly. So no worry if you have no, tech savvy, no worries. I have your back. And then once, we've talked, I'll edit it, add the music, group your story together with, other stories in the same theme. And then once it's ready to go, you will receive an honorarium of $200 as a thank you for your time.
Yeah, and if you start coughing like I did, oops, where's my video? Getting over, I don't know if it's allergies or cold, but Claire will make sure to cut that out as well of your story. Thank goodness. We also have Beatrice Thomas, who is actually another storyteller from season 2 on the line. Beatrice, I don't know if you're able to come on screen, or if not, that's fine too. But Claire, did you want to ask Beatrice some questions about her experience since you worked closely with her?
Yes, Beatrice, so great to see you. Beatrice's story was quite an emotional one, and we had a moment where we cried together during her recording. Beatrice, I was wondering, what was that experience for you, going through kind of that emotional story together, and then hearing the final episode?
I think I might be different than all artists on the planet, which is that I love talking about my work, and I only ever want someone to be interested in talking about my work. And so it's I just think it's a great opportunity anytime that you get to have a really in-depth discussion about what you're doing in your work. The sort of ripple effect, or the it's like that kind of reflection. You kind of see different things in your practice. It gives you, I don't know, it just gives you a real sense of perspective on your practice. And so I think that's always just nice. I think as an artist, it's like very, very often the world makes us move to our next project and our next project and our next project. And oftentimes we don't actually get to kind of talk about the life that is the driver behind all of those amazing products. And so I just think right now I will say it was a great experience, but I think more than ever, even more than before, the world always needs artist stories, but right now, more than ever, we need people who are living, creative lives to share their stories and be heard, seen, audibly. um, and I think storytelling is literally the only thing that really changes hearts and minds. And it's the work that we put on the stages, but it's also the stories that we share in the moments where we're not where we're not performing. And it's hard. Making artwork is not, everyone's like, it must be so fun. It must be so fun. But it's actually really nice to talk about the things that are not that fun, because it reinforces, like, you're going to do it. Like I'm aware of all those things, and still what gets me up in the morning is to figure out how to reflect back from my artist's vision into the world. So I think it's just it has so much for both people who are artists, but also people who are listening, to understand that they can make different choices in their lives. Is that good?
Yeah, Beatrice, I love that. I love that. And I wanted to ask you, because sometimes we do get some submissions that are more promotional in nature. And you've really hit on what is important to share as an artist, and that this isn't a pitch, but that tell us, like, what was it when you submitted? What was the thing that you think was the thing you had to share? Like, what was the
Ooh.
Gets out there.
So
I'm not sure. That's
sadly,
I'm
it broke
all
up a
over the
lot.
place with that question. Difference between a pitch and ultimately what makes the difference between a pitch in your submission and a story, something that's really
Well,
telling
I
something
guess like I think that,
about your
am I breaking up?
life as an artist.
Okay. Am I breaking up? Can you
We
hear me?
can hear you fine. I can hear you fine, Beatrice.
Okay, great. Sorry, I was
Just keep
struggling a
going.
little bit with Jenny, but I heard the question. Thank you for like some summarizing it at the end there. I mean, I think that like I was a public radio audio academy fellow, and so in some ways I learned that the pitch is the story, but I think that the sort of difference in the arts, which is of course the performing arts where we're coming from, and the industry and field we in, pitching is very different. Pitching is a lot about knowing your offering, knowing what are you offering, how long is it, how many people, what's the, what kinds of hearts and minds can you change by booking this work in your space, and that is like more the pitch, like selling yourself in that way. And I think that the story, it's trying to bring out the life behind the pitch. Like people are gonna, we understand great around selling our product maybe, but I think what's great about, or the opportunity that uh, the podcast offers, is to bring out maybe a narrative, a story, or something, an experience in your life that maybe is what's behind what you're selling. It's whether how you got there, how you stay there, like what are the crossroads that you come to. So it's sort of like under the hood, but from that personal practitioner's space. I saw someone say, could it be a trio or a duo, which I would hope that it could be a trio or a duo, because I think that there's so much in the dialogues between collaborators. Like what happens when the lights are off, right? And the audio's down, there's no cues, the audience has gone home. What are the things that you go through to bring the work? And sometimes that's as simple as like navigating how to have to be a working parent and an artist. Sometimes it's managing chronic ailments and being an artist. There's so much that we do. If we're doing it right, it looks easy. I'm a drag queen, so if I'm doing it right, it looks cheap. Okay. But a lot of work goes into it. And so being able to share what those rehearsals look like, what kind of hours we're putting in, the kind of emotional journey that we go on just to get through our work, or the things we sacrifice, or the things we gain. But I think it's just about lifting up the hood and peeling back the curtain and being able to create something relatable.
Mm-hmm. That's so great, Beatrice. I love what you said about how this podcast is an opportunity to kind of understand the why behind what you do, reflect on the themes. And something I want to stress is that potential storytellers, you don't have to have all that figured out. Often when I'm meeting with the storytellers, we're starting the interview, we're talking about the stories, and I start asking questions, start talking about the themes and the why. And I cannot tell you how many times it happens. It has to be in the dozens by now that the storyteller goes, I had never thought about my story that way, or it wasn't until talking with you that I really had this realization and this breakthrough moment about something that I lived through. And so this is really a space to work through that and figure out the why. So you can come with us with a good story of this thing happened, and I promise that between our conversations, the why will come out. It almost always does.
Yeah, Beatrice.
I I would just say, right, artists, agents, managers, creative arts professionals on the call, take advantage of the opportunity to talk with Claire. take advantage of the opportunity to answer those questions, because even if your story doesn't get picked, I'm gonna tell you, you should record it, take the notes, because any interview that you have, maybe you're gonna write a future book, like it's juicy what you get out of it. And it's stuff that might end up in your bio. It's stuff that might end up in, if you do write that autobiography, or if you need something for other interviews, it's highly preparatory for I don't know what. But as artists, our stories, having command of our stories both on stage and off stage, is part of the secret of our success. So I would just take the opportunity to be interviewed and to be heard, because it will still feel really, really good to be in that conversation and dialoguing with someone who doesn't really know about your work. It's going to be enriching. So I would take advantage of that. Just punto. Sorry, Claire. I'm like, but there are benefits of just having that conversation. And Claire is such a professional story seer in some way. Storyteller, yes, but seer. Like there is a thread that you'll say, and then Claire will start like sort of pulling at it. And what will, that little seam will come apart, and there will be the Technicolor Dreamcoat that you might not have even known was in your story. So I just say take advantage of it as an artist to learn more about the ways in which you work. Always stay ready. That's right, Andrea. Come on.
Beautifully said, Beatrice. Thank you so much.
I think we can, first, just a second, because we had one more slide that we wanted to talk about what happens if you're selected. And then we can dive in a little bit more with some questions. So Grace,
I think we could jump right to questions, Jenny. We did the...
Oh, did you?
Yes.
Sorry.
I think you were coughing. No worries.
I think I was coughing. Sorry. You're right. You're absolutely right. I was. Okay, so a couple of the questions, and pardon me too for my audio going in and out. One of the questions was, can you see it?
Yes,
Grace?
there's
Yeah,
one
great.
from Kelsey earlier on in the chat about what about a less technical version of a research paper, if we can make it conversational, tell it in a story.
I guess what I would say to that is that, and this is really part of the idea around arts work life, is the bold, untold stories. If you are coming to us with something you've already published or that's already somewhere else, really frame it in a different way. Perhaps something you discovered while you were writing that technical paper. Like take a little seed out of that or a nugget out of that and tell us a more personal story related to it. We don't want the same paper just done in a more casual way, because we're in the business of revealing something that is new and hasn't been told yet, if that makes sense. So you may have, just look in whatever, if you do have a story that you've already published somewhere, try to look at it from a different angle. Try to find that seed that has yet to develop, and put that in your submission. Claire?
Yeah, and I like the idea because this is, thinking outside the box, research paper we haven't had a researcher on before, but, the findings of your research paper isn't really your story. Your story would be what inspired this research, or, you published your paper and one of the research subjects or someone who's impacted by your work reached out, told you what it meant to them, and it really made you reflect, okay, my work does matter, or I was going through this horrible thing, but publishing this research paper really informed, or my life experience informed this research paper in a way that was good for the community or whatever. So it'd be more about your personal story doing that paper, not the findings of a paper.
Great. Another question, Grace?
Yeah, then we have a question from Hastings that I think Bea alluded to. Can more than one person participate in the recording, like a duo or a trio?
But like Bea said, it's something we haven't done yet. That's how I would put it. So, I mean, go ahead and pitch it. Again, I would focus, it's not, this is not a talking heads kind of space. we don't want to lose the intimacy, but I can kind of hear in my head, and probably some of you know StoryCorps, right? That style. If it is truly personal, and it's something that you, because maybe you created something with another person, that you can talk about in that intimate way, I think that could be done. So it really depends on the nature of what you're talking about. We have had people submit things before that say they want to interview their boss about the work, about this new show that they have. And maybe that doesn't have the elements that we're looking for. But I would say never to anything. It sort of really depends on what you're bringing.
Yeah, and this is has come up with other storytellers before. They say, oh, this story is about, creating the show or creating this company. And really, it wasn't just me. I don't want the podcast to seem like I just did this alone. I want my collaborators to get credit. That's why I think all three of us or all two of us should be on the show. And we've like kind of tried it, I was one storyteller, her co-creator did come on for about 10 minutes, and then we realized there was just too many opinions, and really they kind of realized while talking to me that they both had very different experiences in creating the same show, and we're like, okay, let's just like go with one. But again, we want to hear all your story pitches, all your ideas. Then you and I can just, if we're interested in your story, you and I hop on a call, we chat about it, we figure out the best way to make it work. So absolutely submit it. We just haven't done it before, but we are trying new things this season.
That's right. That's right. And one thing I wanted to add to what Claire was talking about, because she is a master at pulling out like all the threads of like, things that she didn't even think you were ready to say, or that you even knew about yourself. Do make sure that in your submission, you give us something that will make us really curious. So there's a panel of us. It's a panel of APAP members, and then Claire and I and some APAP staff, that look at these. And we look at where you are regionally and nationally and in the world, what discipline are you performing? What is your role? Artist, agent, manager, educator, et cetera, et cetera. We're looking at all of these things. And then we're also looking for that seed of a story that makes us curious. So my challenge as you submit your story is give us, even if you don't have the fully fleshed story, give us something that's going to make us go, I want to know more about that, right? So that's all I ask. If there's the one thing you think about as you're filling out your submission, is what is the piece that's going to make us want to know more? To that point, I did see the question earlier about how many submissions we get, or how many submissions we accept every year. We usually get about 70, and we select up to about 24 because we have 6 stories per sorry, not 6, 4 stories in 6 episodes, right? That's at least in the structure. And maybe again, we're open to like, how do we change that? But that seems to work. Up to 4 voices works really well in a 25 to 30 minute episode without it being too much. It's sort of just enough of each, each story. So that's, if that gives you an idea. We really do try to get, across of things. Diane, yeah, that was your question, I believe.
It was, thank you. So
Yeah.
if you're selecting 4 stories?
We're selecting from up to 24 stories for the season, and roughly there are 3 or 4 stories per episode, which is
that's what I meant.
how I got to 20. Yeah.
Right. So each story then is a maximum of how many minutes typically?
I mean, really, like I said, we're filling usually about a 30-minute episode. I think our episodes have been from 25 minutes or so to maybe a little bit over 30 minutes. I wouldn't worry so much about the length. That's something that Claire works out in the edit. That comes down to what Randall said before. We have probably, what, Claire, like hours of conversation that you have with each person. That's not your worry. She's going to talk with you and she'll bring out the pieces. And then, she knows how to like find the core of the story and the plot and all those pieces so that it sounds like a great, at the end of the day, we have a nice tight, 3 to 5 minute bit or
Okay.
maybe a little longer. Yeah.
Every year, everyone's so worried about the length. And
Don't.
then they hear their episode, they're always like, oh my gosh, that was the perfect amount of time. So I got you.
One more question. Is any part of that editing process collaborative? Or is it, you know, do you make the decisions as you are going through?
Yeah. So, I always promise, the storytellers, there's going to be no surprises. We talk very in depth about what's going to be included in their story. We usually do the recordings over 2 sessions so that the storyteller has a chance to really think about what they said in the first one and then reflect on it before we record the second part. I like doing that way because sometimes they say too much or, it's an emotional experience telling your story. So there is always no surprises. Again, I'm here to make you sound good, but just because of the time constraints, if I was sending edits back to someone and back and forth, it would, this podcast would go out in 2027 instead of this summer. So again, once you do the recordings, I do all the editing and then the episode goes out. But we have not received from the 63 people who had their story go out, not a single complaint, not a single retraction. Everyone emails and says that they loved their episode. So I promise you're in good hands. But yeah, it just, because of time, we just don't have the back and forth capability.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to emphasize what care that Claire puts into all of the process. She is just amazing at this. I too, will be the sounding board as the executive producer, so that she'll send me the script of what she's kind of edited down, so that also I'm just sort of a second check in terms of being somebody who's coming fresh to the story, not knowing what conversations you've had. That to me, as a first timer hearing your story, that I understand the thread of the story. So and that seems to have been a really successful partnership, and like she said, everybody's been really pleased. So we're happy to have and very proud of the fact that we have that history with our storytellers and the trust. And I don't know, again, Randall or Beatrice, if you wanted to chime in at all about that part of the experience, hearing your story. And Randall, did you want to say something about that?
Sure. If you were to say to me, would you have used a different part of the episode? I would say yes. But I do like the way that it was put together. And I hopefully told Claire that. But it was interesting to what I like to have taken out of my stories is, you tell a story for the person that's listening, hopefully, not for yourself. So I like to find out what they heard. So that was an interesting part of the process, to see what Claire heard of my story or what she heard that was most important of my story, or what fit with all the other stories. Whatever the process was, she was the editor, it was up to her. But I was interested in the result of that, and I definitely would have chosen a couple of other bits that she didn't choose, but that's okay. Those things, that's the whole point of it, to tell the story and let her put it together.
Great, thanks for that. Yeah, and Beatrice.
I would also offer that this is a collaboration between podcasters are creators in their own universe. So the collaboration is in your story and what you choose to tell, and their skill and ability. So I definitely would listen to the other work, but I do feel like I trust Claire as an artist. And I hate hearing my voice. I don't want to really return to stories where I have to listen to myself. It is so irritating to me. But what I will tell you, I did listen to it, Claire, but before I listened to it, took me a while. Before I listened to it, I had people in my community reflect back to me that they had heard it, that they loved it, that it was insightful. And what was good about that is then I became curious about hearing my own work. And so it took a while, but what I want to say is that the work is out there, working, moving through the world. And if you, I think, ensure that what you say is authentic to your, like, really, like, the truth vibrates and resonates higher than any kind of like lie we want to tell ourselves or whatever. So as long as I think the artist comes through with their authenticity, you can stand by that. And then it becomes about looking at what Claire creates inside of your story. And it's really so wonderful as creative professionals to have someone reflect back to us. How often does that happen, even as you're producing, as you're agenting, whatever the things you're doing? All right, that's what I had to share.
Wonderful. I love that. I love that. I don't see any other questions. So if anybody had a question still, raise their hand. I just had a thought that I wanted to share, which is, this is the first time we've done like this session ahead of time so that we could chat with you. I mean, now we have a little bit more experience in doing this, so we have a little bit more to reflect on, which is great, in addition to having our amazing storytellers here. But I was just going to mention that if for some reason you already submitted your story and now you have a different idea or you want to submit again, that's happened before. I think we've had a couple times somebody submitted 2 stories, because they just weren't sure which story to pick. That's okay. That's okay. That's totally okay. If you just get that seed of inspiration, or you submitted already and you're like, oh, now I have a totally different take on my story or how I want to approach this, absolutely drop it in again. We will see, that we have a committee. We can see who's submitted things, and we'll make, the best judgment from what you've submitted, like which thing, might be more of a contender in terms of stories. So, certainly don't feel like it's just like it's a done deal at this point. So I just wanted to offer that for anybody here in the room or anybody who may be watching this online shortly. Let's see, there might have been a message here. Okay, yes, and thank you. Grace is dropping the link again to share your story. Priority deadline is this Thursday. What that means is that's when the committee is going through the first batch. Right now, we're at about 35 stories where we've gotten quite a few, and I know we'll get quite a few before Thursday's deadline. So it's always good. We appreciate it when you're able to submit it earlier, because that allows us more time to sit with your story. But again,
if you're a chronic procrastinator, that's fine. We always get like 10 stories
exactly.
at like midnight on April 10th.
That's right.
Don't let the deadline keep you from submitting. I promise we love procrastinators here. Send in your story.
Yes. And I want to welcome Andrea is here from the committee, as well as Francine. But Andrea, I'd love to get your perspective on this process, because of course you've been through it a few times, and Francine too, if you want to, but it looks like Andrea is ready to hop on. Welcome, Andrea.
Yes, hi. We have so many great submissions that come. So the whole task of reviewing everything and choosing our favorites is always a very hard and tedious process. But I appreciate the way that we are very respectful and that we have a very specific system. So we make sure that we are reviewing them with as much criteria and unbiased as possible. But I do want to add that a note about the story itself and the way that it's being framed. Sometimes we come across perspective stories that are very salesy. They sound like you are just advertising your business or your work. And I know that a lot of APAP is that way. A lot of it is about pitching yourself and your business, but this is not that. This is about telling and sharing your story. So even if it is about your business and how proud you are of that accomplishment, make sure that you're telling it in a very, keeping in mind everything that we talked about today, in a very narrative way, and not in and this is why you should hire me to do my work. It's a small distinction, but it's a huge one when we're reviewing it, because we're going to choose the one that has more heart and that has more narrative over the one that feels like a sales pitch. So please, if I can impart that to anybody. We've seen some really interesting people and stories come by, but I hope that they'll reframe it and come back to say it in a personal narrative way.
That's a great point, Andrea. Thank you. And, if you're hearing a potential storyteller, you're hearing something going, oh my gosh, a narrative this, I'm not a natural writer. We regularly choose story submissions that are literally bullet points. They don't have to be complete sentences. Just this happened, this impacted me, this is the takeaway. Like, don't think you have to write out. It doesn't have to be polished. Don't even have to run it through spell check. Just like give us the truth of what really happened. You don't like, it's about the truth and the emotion and the narrative, the story, not about it being beautifully written or beautiful prose or all put together. I'm here to help you get there. Just, don't worry about it being a finished piece.
And also, you're allowed to submit, if you feel more comfortable talking through it, you can submit an audio file. Some people have done that. They just feel more comfortable. And we also get kind of a better sense of, what you sound like. Not that, but I mean, just sometimes people feel they can express themselves better through voice than they can through writing. So absolutely, that's a fine way to do it. We don't have a bias towards either, by the way, but just that's another option. I have one question that came up, but I just want to make sure, Francine, who's also on the committee, if you wanted to give any insights. If you're not able to, that's fine as well. How about I do this? I'm going to answer the question, and then Francine, if you feel like popping on, that way you're not on the spot. Eric sent me a question. Are you seeking true stories about our own lives or fictional stories? And that clearly the answer is the first. These are actually true stories from your experience as an arts worker. That is the aim of this podcast, is to capture the real life stories of people who work in the arts and to elevate and bring visibility to those stories. And so we're getting close to time, but this has been a really great session. I really appreciate everybody's questions and the contributions of our storytellers and our podcast committee, and of course to my colleagues Grace and Claire, who are both amazing, especially when I'm coughing or I try to repeat a slide. Yeah, it's been great meeting you all. I hope that each one of you is submitting a story. We look forward to hearing about your experience as an arts worker in that moment. Just as a review, we're looking for things that are relevant in 2025. We do have the option, Claire talked about this year, that we're doing a new feature that's a day in the life. So if you have a story that you also think would make a very interesting audio essay, so think about if you have, like, if you're in a studio and there's like lots of stuff going on in the making of something, or you're somebody who has to be on the go all the time, and so you're wanting to capture that. That's like the kind of thing. Like, for instance, nobody would want to hear the audio story of my work because I sit at a desk all day, and so there's nothing aside from my cats. It would just be really not a great audio story. Diane, please.
Thanks. I do have another question.
Yeah,
is this podcast, and I apologize, I've not yet had an opportunity to listen to any, but I will. Is this only available to APAP members?
Oh, no, absolutely not. No, this is available on all podcast platforms. It's on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts, it's everywhere. It's just all the different podcasts. Please go listen if you haven't had a chance. It's all 3 seasons are available. Just pick your favorite podcast app.
And will the storyteller have an opportunity to, for example, link it to their website if
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. A lot of people use
you don't have to be an APAP member to submit a story. And then we also, will create, once if your story is selected, it makes it in, like, we create little like promo audio and slides and tweets and videos for all the storytellers so they can share it with their network and, post on LinkedIn. I was featured on a podcast, go listen, and we'll help you promote your story.
Yeah. Oh, we want you to promote it. We want your friends to listen. The more you magnify the podcast, the better, because we really believe, and this goes back to like where we started in 2022, which is we really believe that the stories of artists and arts workers are essential, and people need to know what goes into our work, and they don't know enough, and so they need to understand us as the humans behind all of the glitz and glamour of the arts. So I do appreciate everybody being here. And I look forward to seeing your submissions. It looks like there are no more questions. So, and we're at just about time. So again, thank you to everyone. Have a lovely rest of your day. Please go ahead and submit your stories, and please go listen to the podcast. Grace dropped the rss.com link in there, which also shows you what podcast platforms you can listen on if you need that. But again, otherwise just search arts period, work period, life period online, and you'll find us. So wonderful to see you. Take care, everyone. Have a great afternoon.